The chair scraped, she dropped, I grinned. That was it. That was the whole plan. Pull the chair out from under Dr. Lena Vasquez, watch her grab the table, watch her glare at me like I was something she stepped on, and go back to pretending I was invisible. 3 seconds of entertainment in what had already been the longest Tuesday of my life. She caught herself. She always catches herself. That is the most annoying thing about her. She turned and looked at me with the kind of expression that makes grown men consider new careers, and I gave her my best smile, the one that has never once worked on anyone, and turned back to my clipboard. I was Marcus Webb. Badge said support staff. My job that day was to make sure the water pitchers stayed full and the microphone cables did not become a tripping hazard. I was so far below the diplomatic food chain that I was practically geological. Nobody was watching me. Nobody ever watched me. Except the Vracath were watching me. I did not know that yet. The summit had been going on for 6 hours. Earth's first official contact with an interstellar delegation, and it was being held in the Gary, Indiana Convention Center because someone on the site committee had confused a spreadsheet column and nobody wanted to be the one to say something. The parking lot still had a banner from a boat show the previous weekend. Welcome, we said to the universe. Please ignore the banner. The Vracath were 7 feet tall, each one of them. Their skin was somewhere between gray and stone, layered in plates that looked like they had grown rather than been attached, and they smelled like a thunderstorm that had made bad decisions. There were 7 of them seated on the far side of the main table, perfectly still in a way that living things are not usually still, and Earth's diplomatic team sat across from them trying very hard to look like they belonged in the same room. Lena was part of that team. She was the lead xenolinguist, which meant she had spent 3 years learning to communicate with beings who did not use human language, and she was very good at it, and she knew she was very good at it, and she had the professional confidence of someone who had never once pulled a chair out from under anyone at a galactic summit. She was also the reason the coffee machine on the 3rd floor now had a sign that said please ask before adjusting the settings, which was directly my fault, but also directly her fault for leaving the settings wrong in the first place. I pulled the chair because I was bored and she was standing right there, and it felt like the kind of thing that would make the next 8 hours slightly more survivable. I want to be clear about that. There was no strategy, there was no statement. There was a man, a chair, and a terrible decision. The chair scraped across the floor. She dropped 4 inches and caught the table edge. Her papers scattered. One of her pens rolled off the table and spun across the polished floor, all the way to the other side of the room, and I watched it go because it was genuinely impressive how far that pen traveled. And then the room went quiet. Not the normal quiet of people choosing not to speak. A different kind. The kind that has weight and texture. The kind that you feel in your back teeth. I looked up from the pen. All 7 Vracath were looking at me. Not at the pen, not at Lena, at me. The delegation leader stood. He was the tallest of the 7, which at that point felt like unnecessary information, and the plates along his shoulders had a different coloring, darker, the way old iron gets dark. He stood with the slow, deliberate movement of something that had never once been in a hurry because nothing had ever made it need to hurry. He looked at me across the length of the table, and I became aware, in a very specific and unpleasant way, that I had never before been looked at like that. Like I had done something. The translator badge clipped to my lanyard, the same one that had been rendering 7 hours of diplomatic language, clicked and hummed. There was a pause. 3 seconds, 4, 5. Then it spoke. This one he challenges for the seat of the honored. Name him. The words came out in flat, automated English and then sat in the air like they had no intention of leaving. I looked at my lanyard. It was on backwards. I could see the clip from the front and the badge ID number from the side. I had been wearing it backwards for 6 hours and nobody had mentioned it. I became very focused on the lanyard. Someone behind me said something in a low voice, one of the senior diplomats. I did not catch the words because my translator badge was still processing, and my brain had decided to allocate most of its available resources to the lanyard issue. Lena had turned completely around in her chair. She was looking at me, not the glare from before, something else. Something that looked like a person watching a very slow, very preventable disaster occurring in real time and being physically unable to reach the off switch. One of the diplomats leaned toward me and whispered, "Name yourself." It was not advice. It was a prompt, like when a teacher calls on you and the kid next to you hisses the answer. I looked at the delegation leader. He was still standing, still looking at me, waiting. I said the only thing I had available. Marcus Webb." The translator badge picked it up, rendered it, sent it across the room in Vracath. All 7 of them inhaled. Not a gasp, not surprise, something more like the sound of 7 people who have been waiting for something and have just been told it is on its way. The delegation leader lowered himself back into his seat with that same slow, unhurried movement. He said something else. 4 words, short, precise, deliberate. The translator took its time. When it came, the words were this: "Veb has spoken his name." That was when Lena closed her eyes. Not in relief, in the specific expression of someone who has just received information that is going to make their life significantly worse, and is taking a single moment to acknowledge that before moving forward. She opened them again, looked at me. She said very quietly so only I could hear, "Do not say anything else." I nodded. I looked back at the delegation leader. He was watching me with an expression I did not have the vocabulary for in any language. Not hostility, not welcome, something older than either. I looked at my pen, still resting against the far baseboard where it had rolled. Glorious pen, magnificent, well-traveled pen. My lanyard was still on backwards. Nobody told me what had just happened. Not in that room, not in that moment. The summit resumed around me like a river resuming after a stone drops into it. But something had shifted in the air, some pressure or temperature that I could not name, and the Vracath delegation moved differently for the rest of the session, with a focus that had a different center than it had before. That center was me. I refilled water pitchers. I checked the microphone cables. I kept my eyes on my clipboard and tried very hard to be the furniture I had been hired to be. When the session broke for the evening and the delegations filed out, the Vracath leader passed within 4 feet of me. He did not look at me again. He did not need to. He had already seen what he came to see. I straightened my lanyard, too late obviously still. I straightened it. Lena was waiting at the door. She looked at me the way you look at someone who has stepped off a curb and into traffic, and is still standing, and somehow does not know it yet. "Come with me," she said. "Right now, we need to talk." I followed her. Behind us, through the glass panels of the convention center, I could see the Vracath ships visible in the low clouds above Gary, Indiana, holding position, lit from underneath by the lights of the city, enormous and quiet and patient. My pen was still on the floor. I thought about going back for it. I kept walking. Nobody briefed me. That was the first problem. There was no orientation packet, no laminated card, no 30-second summary of what pulling a chair means in Vracath culture. You would think, given that this was humanity's first interstellar diplomatic summit, someone would have prepared a document titled "Things You Should Not Accidentally Do." You would be wrong. Lena briefed me herself, in a storage room adjacent to the main hall, surrounded by folding chairs and stacked tablecloths, and a broken projector that someone had given up on. She stood with her arms crossed, and her voice at the controlled, precise level of someone who is choosing very carefully not to raise it. She told me that among the Vracath, a formal gathering had rules older than their spaceflight. Every seat at a diplomatic table was a declared position. A seat did not simply mean where you sat. It meant what you were. Your seat was your standing, your voice, your place in the order of things. To pull someone's seat in that context meant one thing and one thing only. You were saying that their place was yours to give or take, that they sat at your permission, that their position in the room existed only because you allowed it. It was the highest dominance display in Vracath culture, she said, performed exclusively by blood-proven warriors, before a formal challenge. I looked at the broken projector. And giving your name afterward, she continued, is the formal acceptance of consequence. In their tradition, you do not name yourself in a challenge unless you intend to see it through. Your name becomes the oath. I said, I was just pulling your chair. She said, I know that. I said, I do it all the time. I did it last Thursday in the break room. She said, the break room does not have 7 Vracath warriors in it. Fair point, I said. She was quiet for a moment, then she told me the rest of it. My name, Webb. In their language, phonetically, it landed close to a word, Veb. She said it carefully, watching my face. In Vracath, Veb meant the one who weaves the fates of others. It was not a common name. It was not really a name at all. It was a title, the kind given to figures in their history who had shaped the outcomes of things larger than themselves. They thought I had chosen it. They thought I had walked into that room, identified the moment, pulled the chair of Earth's head diplomat in front of their entire delegation, and then introduced myself by a title that announced exactly who I was. They thought it was deliberate. Every single part of it. I sat down on a folding chair. It creaked. The whole thing deserved that creak. So what happens now, I said. She told me about the Grakthal. A named challenger in Vracath law must face a trial, not symbolic, not ceremonial, an actual physical proving with stakes that were recognized across 17 star systems. If I refused, it was an insult of a kind that did not have diplomatic remedies. If I accepted and yielded, there were protocols. Honorable loss had its own structure. The Vracath respected it. The key word, she said, was yield. There was a word I would need to say. One word in their language meaning I am lesser. Once I said it, the trial ended. No further consequence. She looked at me like she was waiting for something. I realized after a moment that I was laughing. Not nervously, not with any kind of edge. I was genuinely, actually laughing, because the whole thing was objectively the funniest sequence of events I had ever been part of. And I had once attended a company team-building retreat where the zip line broke and the motivational speaker fell into the lake. This was funnier than that. Lena watched me laugh. Her expression went through several stages. First the controlled homicide phase, then something more complicated, then something quieter. She said, "Stop being charming at the apocalypse." I stopped laughing. That landed in a place I had not anticipated. I am not sure I had ever been called charming, and I am certain I had never been called it like that, like it was both an observation and a small, reluctant admission. I looked at my lanyard, straightened it again, still backwards. "What do I need to do?" I said. She walked me through the structure, 3 rounds, each one a different form of the trial. I could yield at any point. The recommended approach, she said, from the diplomatic team was to perform honorably and then yield in the 3rd round. Show respect for the tradition. Show willingness to engage. Do not embarrass the Vracath by refusing, and do not embarrass Earth by failing completely. Lose well, in other words. "I can do that," I said. I meant it completely. She nodded, turned to leave. Then she stopped in the doorway. She said without turning around, "Your badge is on backwards." She left. I looked down at it. I flipped it around. In the corridor outside, I could hear the diplomatic teams moving, voices low and urgent, footsteps quick on the polished floor. The Vracath delegation had returned to their ship for the night, but their presence was still in the building somehow, in the pressure of the air, in the way everyone moved just slightly faster than normal. Someone from the senior diplomatic staff found me 20 minutes later and walked me through the official position. I was to treat this as an honor. I was to engage fully. I was to yield at the appropriate moment. My participation would cement Earth standing as a culture willing to meet others on their own terms. He shook my hand at the end of it, very seriously. I thought about telling him that I had done it because I was bored, and Lena had the kind of focused competence that made me want to knock something loose in her universe for exactly 3 seconds. I did not tell him that. He left. I sat in the storage room again. Just me and the folding chairs and the broken projector and the very specific silence of someone who has accidentally agreed to represent his entire species in a trial designed for alien warriors. I pulled out my phone, opened a document, typed the words resignation letter at the top, stared at it, deleted it, typed it again. My hand was resting on the table and I looked at it for a long time. Regular hand, nothing special about it. I had used it my whole life to do ordinary things. Tomorrow, it was going to be part of something that 43 species would be watching. I closed the document without saving it. Somewhere above Gary, Indiana, the Vracath fleet held its position and waited. So did I. They gave me 72 hours. The diplomatic team used all of it. Briefings, strategy sessions, language primers, physical assessments. I was measured, evaluated, counseled, and advised by 11 different people over 3 days, and by the end of it I knew exactly one thing they had not taught me. I still intended to lose. That was the plan: lose well, yield at the right moment, go home. The arena was a temporary structure the Vracath had assembled on the convention center's east parking lot overnight. I do not know what I expected. Lights, maybe. Spectacle. What they built was simpler than that, a circle of standing stone columns that they had apparently transported in segments, fitted together with a precision that suggested they had done this before, many times in many places. No decoration. No fanfare. Just the circle and the columns and the ground and the sky above Gary, which was doing its best that morning. Genuinely, it was trying. Their delegation was already inside the circle when I arrived. The leader stood at the center. He looked at me as I walked in, and his expression was the same one from the summit room, that unreadable, ancient attention, like I was something he was taking his time about. Lena was in the viewing area with the rest of the diplomatic team. I did not look at her when I walked in. I looked at the columns. I counted them. There were 12. I have no idea why I needed to know that. I needed to know it. The first round began without ceremony. 2 iron bars were brought out, thick as my wrist, roughly a meter long. One for me. One for the Vracath warrior who stepped forward, a younger one than the leader, built like a quarry. The bars had been heated. Not glowing, not dramatic, just hot. The kind of hot that tells you immediately that this is serious. The instruction was simple: hold the bar, do not release it. The first one to let go loses the round. I picked up the bar. It was very hot. I thought about a lot of things in the first minute. I thought about the water pitchers I was not refilling. I thought about my resignation letter. I thought about the pen, which someone had presumably picked up by now, and whether it still worked. The Vracath warrior across from me held his bar with perfect stillness. I held mine. Somewhere in the second minute my hands were telling me things that I was choosing not to listen to. Not because I was brave. I want to be precise about this. Bravery had nothing to do with it. I have never in my life been the first one to let go of something. It is a personality flaw. It has caused problems in negotiations, in relationships, in furniture arrangement situations involving my college roommate and a couch neither of us were willing to move first. I did not let go. The 4-minute mark came. The Vracath warrior released the bar, set it down with care, stepped back. The circle was very quiet. I put the bar down on my side. My hands were not happy with me. I appreciated their feedback and moved on. The leader watched from the center. He had not moved in 4 minutes. He watched me the way you watch something you are still deciding about. Round 2. The second round was different. No object. One of the Vracath warriors, older, heavier in the shoulders, was going to deliver a single strike. The Vrahin, they called it. A pressure blow, heel of the palm to the shoulder, designed to buckle the recipient. Designed to communicate, in purely physical terms, exactly what the weight of the Vracath was. The diplomatic council had told me to brace and absorb it and maintain my footing as long as possible. Yielding after this round was entirely acceptable and respected. The warrior struck. My shoulder went wrong. There is no other way to describe it. Something in there made a decision independent of me, a loud, decisive, final-sounding decision, and my whole left side dropped and my vision went white at the edges for a moment. I did not fall. I also could not fully feel my left arm. I was standing, though. That was something. I was standing in the circle in the east parking lot of the Gary, Indiana Convention Center with a shoulder that had serious complaints to file, and I was still standing. The silence was absolute. I looked up at the Vracath warrior. I said, "Is that all you have got, big guy?" My translator badge rendered it faithfully, in real time, to the entire delegation. I want to be clear that I did not plan that. It came out because it is the kind of thing that comes out of me when I am in pain and uncomfortable and not thinking carefully. It is the same reflex that made me pull the chair. It is a documented problem. The circle erupted. Not in anger. The Vracath delegation made a sound I had not heard from them before, deep and rhythmic and rising, and it took me a moment to understand what it was. They were approving. The leader for the first time moved, just his head, a slight inclination like a mountain acknowledging weather. Round 3. He stepped forward himself. He did not pick up a bar. He did not raise his hand. He looked at me for a long moment and then he spoke. 7 full minutes of Vracath at his full register, and my translator badge rendered every word of it in steady, flat, automated English as it came. He spoke about failure, about the weight of it, about the difference between a thing that stands and a thing that only looks like it is standing. He spoke about the trials he had seen, the challengers who had thought courage was enough, who had not understood that the Gracthal was not a test of strength, but a test of honest self-knowledge. He spoke about what it meant to name yourself before a truth that would not look away. It was not cruel. That was the part that made it hard. It was simply accurate. Every sentence found something real and pressed on it with great patience. I stood there and I listened. When he finished, the circle waited. I was going to say the yield word. I had decided. I had made peace with it. I had planned the whole thing out in the 12 seconds of silence after he stopped speaking. I would say the word. I would bow my head the way Lena had shown me. I would walk out of the circle with my ruined shoulder and my backwards badge and my entire undistinguished record intact. I looked up at the viewing area. Lena was not watching the leader. She was not watching the circle or the columns or the sky over Gary. She was watching me. Not with the rakin' slow-motion face. Not with the controlled professional composure she had been wearing for 3 days. Something quieter than that. Something that had been there for a while, I thought, without either of us nomming it. I did not look away from her. I looked back at the leader. I said, "I know." He did not respond. "I know all of that," I said. "I am the man who pulled a chair as a joke. I am the man with the badge on backwards. I am not a warrior. I am not a diplomat. I am a logistics coordinator who showed up to make sure nobody tripped on a microphone cable." I paused. "But I am still here," I said, "and you are still talking." The translator rendered it and sent it out into the air, and then there was nothing left to say. The leader looked at me for a long time. "Veb," he said finally, "the Weaver stands." He stepped back to the center of the circle. The fleet, I found out later, moved back 3 light minutes the moment those words were transmitted. I sat down on the ground because my legs had reached the end of their professional commitment to this situation and were taking an unscheduled break. I sat there in the circle with the 12 columns and the Gary sky and my shoulder informing me at length of its grievances, and I sat there for a while. Nobody rushed me. That was the part I remembered most after everything else. Nobody rushed me. The arena came down overnight. By morning the columns were gone and the parking lot was just a parking lot again, with faded lines and a pothole near the northeast corner that the city of Gary had been meaning to fix. If you had not been there, you would never have known. I was there, I knew. My left shoulder was in a temporary brace. The medical team had assessed it the previous evening and used the word impressive in a way that did not mean anything good. I had a follow-up appointment scheduled for the following week and a strict instruction not to lift anything heavier than a pen. I thought about telling them about the pen. I did not. The diplomatic team was managing the aftermath in 3 conference rooms simultaneously. The summit had shifted from a standard introductory session into something that did not have a precedent in any of Earth's existing protocol documents, and the people whose job it was to write such documents were working at a speed that suggested genuine panic wearing a professional outfit. I was not in those rooms. I was sitting in the corridor outside them on a chair that someone had placed there, with the energy of a person parking a problem somewhere visible so they could deal with it later. Lena found me there. She sat in the chair next to mine. She had a medical kit with her. She set it on her knee and opened it without asking permission and began unwrapping my hand, where the first-round burns had been treated the night before, but apparently not to her satisfaction. She worked with the focused, quiet attention of someone who needed something to do with her hands. She said, "You did not have to win." I said, "I know." She said, "They would have respected a clean yield." I said, "I know that too." She was quiet for a moment. Her hands kept moving. She said, "So why?" I watched her work. The corridor was empty except for us. The sounds from the conference rooms were muffled and distant, and the convention center hummed with the particular low frequency of a building that contained a great deal of consequence. "Someone told me to stop being charming at the apocalypse," I said, "so I tried the other way." Her hand stopped. 1 second, just one. Then she finished the wrap, tied it off, clicked the kit shut, and stood up. She walked back toward the conference rooms. I looked at the chair she had been sitting in. I looked at my wrapped hand. I looked at the ceiling. There was a water stain up there, roughly shaped like a boot. I looked at it for a long time and did not think about anything in particular. An aide appeared at the end of the corridor and told me that the senior diplomatic team needed to see me. I followed him in. The conference room had 8 people in it and a great deal of coffee that nobody was drinking. They told me what winning the Gracthal meant. They told me with the careful, measured packing of people delivering information they were not fully comfortable with. Gracthal, they called it, the term the Vracath used, blood sovereign, an individual whose word carried the weight of interstellar law, a recognized autonomous voice in the galactic compact, independent of the nation or species they came from. I let that sit for a moment. "Independent of the nation," I said. "Yes," said the diplomat who was doing most of the talking, a careful man named Oliver Grant, who had the specific energy of someone who had been awake for 40 hours and had stopped being surprised by anything around hour 30. "So I am," I said, working it through out loud, effectively my own sovereign entity in terms of galactic law. "That is the Vracath position, yes." "My badge still says support staff," I said. Oliver looked at me. "We are aware," he said. The blood oath, they explained, was the next step. The Vracath delegation leader had made a formal request. A ritual compact, a Vethka, my blood and his, a scar, a few words, a bond recognized in 17 systems as a declaration of permanent alliance. If I accepted, Earth gained a standing it would have taken 50 years of conventional diplomacy to build. The Vracath fleet, currently positioned within the outer system, would shift to a posture of recognized partnership rather than neutral observation. If I declined, the situation was not catastrophic, Oliver said, with the tone of someone who was not entirely sure that was true. "How not catastrophic?" I said. He gave me a number, a rough diplomatic risk assessment on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being fine and 10 being something nobody wanted to finish the sentence about. 7, he said. "That is not encouraging," I said. "And if I say yes," I said. 1, he said, "maybe a 2. I looked at my wrapped hand. the brace on my shoulder, the water stain on the corridor ceiling, visible through the conference room door that had been left open. I said a word under my breath that was not quite an oath, but was as close as I usually got. I said yes. The Vethka was performed in the main hall with the delegations assembled. The Vrakoth leader stood across from me. A blade was brought out, small and simple, dark metal. His aide held it flat on both palms, and the leader took it and held it toward me first, which I later learned was significant, blade toward yourself being the position of trust. I held out my right hand. He made a small cut across my palm, clean and quick. It hurt the way things hurt when they are true. I did not flinch. I did not flinch because the viewing area had a familiar set of eyes in it, and I had made my decision about that, quietly and without announcement, somewhere between the corridor chair and this room. The leader made the same cut on his own palm. He pressed them together, my hand and his, and he spoke something long and formal in Vrakoth that the translator handled carefully, and the last line came through as, "Your blood now speaks before mine." I nodded, like I did this every week. Later, storage room, same one as before, same folding chairs and tablecloths and broken projector. I was sitting on the floor this time, back against the wall, shoulder brace off so the medical team could get a better look. They had gotten their better look and left. I had the ice pack. Cool and Comfort, 12 ounces, industrial catering brand. Lena came in. She sat across from me, not on the floor, on a folding chair, at the professional remove of someone maintaining a professional remove. She had the medical kit again. She reached for my bandaged hand. I let her take it. She unwrapped it, checked the cut, began rewrapping with clean bandaging. Her hands were steady in the specific way that means someone is concentrating on keeping them that way. I watched the ice pack. I read the label on the back. Ingredients, it said, which was followed by a list of things that were not ingredients in any meaningful sense, technical polymer descriptions, safety warnings, country of manufacture. I read all of it. She finished the wrap. She did not let go of my hand immediately. She held it for a moment, looking at the bandage, making small adjustments that did not need making. Then she set it down, stood up, picked up the kit. Halfway to the door, she stopped. She said without turning, "They sent a message, the Vrakoth." I said, "What kind of message?" She said, "A formal request. They want you to address the Galactic Compact." I said nothing. "All 43 species," she said. "Full session. They have submitted the request through the Vethka channel, which means it carries weight that Earth cannot easily decline." She paused. There was one more thing. I could hear it in the way she paused. "The request," she said, "specifies that you should bring the woman who sat in the contested chair." I said, "They mean you." She said, "They mean me." I said, "They saw you." She said quietly, "Apparently." I looked at the ice pack. Cool and Comfort, 12 ounces. She left. I sat there for a while longer. The shoulder hurt and the hand hurt and the floor was cold, and I had 312 unread messages on my phone, and somewhere above us, a fleet of Vrakoth ships was holding its position in the outer system, with the patient certainty of something that had already decided how this ended. I did not open my phone. I sat there and I thought about 43 species, and about a woman who had just checked my bandage twice and left without saying anything that mattered and said all of it anyway. Then I got up. There was a lot to do. I asked for 2 days before the address. They gave me one. I spent most of it staring at a blank document, typing things, deleting them, and staring at the ceiling of my hotel room, which had no water stains and was therefore less interesting than the convention center ceiling had been. I had prepared remarks by the second morning, 4 paragraphs, careful, diplomatic, appropriately weighted language about humanity's commitment to interstellar partnership and the principles of mutual respect across cultures. I had run them past Oliver. He had approved them. They were solid. I read them one more time on the shuttle to the Galactic Compact facility, which the Vrakoth had made available to Earth for the session. a structure in low orbit that humanity had been invited to approach exactly once before, for the initial contact protocols, and had not expected to approach again this soon. Lena sat across from me on the shuttle. She had a tablet in her hands with translation notes. She had been working since before I woke up. I could tell by the particular quality of focus she had, the kind that comes after several hours of sustained effort, where the mind is moving fast but the body has started to conserve energy. She looked up at one point and caught me not looking at my prepared remarks. She said, "Are you ready?" I said, "Yes." She looked at me for a moment longer than she needed to. She looked back at her tablet. The Galactic Compact facility was enormous in the way that things built by and for 43 species tend to be enormous. There was no single design logic to it. It had grown over what I later learned was 400 years of expansion, each species adding in a way that made sense to them, and the result was something that should not have been coherent but was, the way very old cities are coherent, not because of planning, but because of time and use and the slow accumulation of purpose. Our assigned area was scaled for human dimensions, which I appreciated. The podium was not. It was built for Vracath standard, which meant it came to approximately my sternum, and the speaker's platform behind it was designed for someone significantly taller. My feet did not reach the floor. I stood there with my feet hanging and looked out at the assembled delegations and took stock of the situation. 43 species. Some of them I could see with my eyes, in shapes and forms and colors that my brain was processing with the particular quiet effort of encountering something genuinely new. Some of them existed at frequencies or temperatures or spatial orientations that required translation systems to even register as present. All of them were attending. All of them had their feeds active, their translators engaged, their designated representatives present. All of them were waiting for me. I looked at my prepared remarks. I read the first line. I put the document down. I said, "Okay, here is the thing. 43 translator systems, adjusted in real time." I told them about the chair. I told it exactly as it happened. Support staff badge, backwards lanyard, 6 hours of water pitchers and microphone cables, a woman who annoyed me in the way that competent people sometimes annoy people who are not using their own competence for anything in particular, and a 3-second decision made out of boredom. I told them I pulled the chair because it seemed funny, not because I saw an opportunity, not because I had calculated anything, because it seemed funny and I did it. I told them about the iron bar. I told them I held it not because I was brave but because I do not let go of things first. I told them it is a documented flaw. I told them it has caused problems in my life that I would not recommend to anyone. I told them about round 2, the shoulder, what happened to it, what I said afterward and why I said it, which was simply that it came out because that is what comes out of me when I am in pain and not thinking carefully. I told them about round 3. My voice did something here that I had not planned for. Not a break, not anything dramatic, just a slight change in texture, the way a road changes when you cross from one county to another. I told them that I was going to yield. I had decided. I had made peace. And then I looked up and there was someone watching me, and not in the way that the room was watching me. In the way that one person watches another person when they have something they have not said yet, and I saw it, and I did not yield. I said, I am not a warrior. I am not a diplomat. I am a man who got here by accident and stayed because it turned out to matter. And I think, I said, I genuinely think, that is something humans do. We get places by accident. We pull a chair as a joke and end up standing in a circle that has not had someone like us in it before. We hold on past the point of sense. We say the wrong thing at the worst moment and somehow it lands. I paused. We are annoying that way, I said. Something moved through the assembled delegations. Not laughter, not applause. Something more like recognition, the sound of many different minds encountering a thing they had not previously considered and finding it accurate. I did not say anything else. I looked at Oliver in the human viewing section. He had an expression that I could not read, which was unusual because Oliver had the face of a man who had trained himself to communicate exactly one thing at a time, and that thing was usually mild concern. I looked at Lena. She was looking at her hands. Then she looked up. The Vracath leader stood. He struck his chest plate once with the heel of his palm, a single sharp sound that rang across the chamber. Beside him his aide stood, did the same. One by one, across the assembled delegations, representatives rose. Some struck their own equivalent of a chest plate. Some made sounds I did not have the anatomy to produce. Some communicated approval in ways that bypassed my senses entirely and came through only as a registered acknowledgement in the translation feed. It took 4 minutes. When it was done, every delegation that had a standing position to take had taken it. Not agreement, not submission. Oliver explained it to me afterward precisely, with citations from 40 years of compact documentation. Recognition. They had recognized me as a voice worth hearing. Which was, Oliver said, quietly, more than most species achieved in their first century of membership. I nodded. He shook my hand carefully, avoiding the bandaged palm. I walked out of the chamber and into the corridor that connected the speaking floor to the viewing areas, and I stood there in the corridor for a while because I did not know what to do with myself, which was not a new feeling but had a new weight to it. Lena came around the corner. She had her translation notes under one arm and her tablet in her hand, and she had not changed out of the clothes she had been wearing since before I woke up that morning. She stopped when she saw me. We stood there. She said that was either the best diplomatic address in human history or the worst. I said coin flip. She looked at me. She said, "You said in the third round that you saw someone watching you." I said, "Yes." She said, "You meant me." I said, "I meant me to mean you, yes." She was quiet. I said, "I have been meaning me to mean you for a while. I was waiting until I thought it was going in both directions." She said nothing. She looked at me with that expression, the one from the arena, the one from the corridor, the one I had been trying to name for several days. I was done waiting for the name. I looked along the corridor. There was a chair against the wall, one of the standard ones, plain and functional, placed there by someone doing corridor logistics. I walked to it. I picked it up. I set it in front of her. I held it. Not a pull, not a joke. I held the back of it and waited. She looked at the chair. She looked at me. The corner of her mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile and was entirely one. She sat down. I sat in the chair next to hers, on the floor of a corridor in a structure built by 43 species, and we sat there together without saying anything, and somewhere 17 systems over the Vracath fleet held its position, patient and certain as old iron. My shoulder hurt. My hand hurt. My badge was in my pocket and I had no idea which way it was facing. I did not check. For the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And I had not planned any of it. Not one single part of it.